everybody. Welcome to Strategy Now. I voted. Did you? Yep, I went out. I voted this morning. It was great. I got in there, and there were a lot of referendums, a lot of races that I had done some homework on, some I didn't. So if you haven't gone and voted yet, take an opportunity to learn a little bit more about some judges that might be running. But there were plenty of other referendums that I felt were important to know and to understand and see how they impacted me, and I was really happy to be part of the process. Talking about the markets and what's going on right now, the S&Ps are up about 10 at 2138. You have the NASDAQ, it's up around 33 at 4808.75. You have the Russell 2000 up 370 at 1195.10. And you have the Dow Jones up 124 points at 18,316. It looks like right now, oh, and by the way, if you take a look at the bonds, both the 30-year and 10-year, both down, yields are up, starting to hit that 183, 184 level, and on the 10-year, and the 30-year still up in that 260 range. So we're not going to know the results of the elections right now until late tonight or maybe even early tomorrow morning. With that being said, though, you're looking at some of the early exit polls, and it clearly looking like Clinton has about a 2.5% lead, a little bit less than 3% lead coming out right now as far as the vote's concerned. But guess what? It's everyone's right. So, why is this so important? Well, to not state the obvious, but I will anyways, this is the most powerful nation in the world. The amount of influence that we have in this country is enormous, and you've seen it played out in the world markets. We've talked about it every morning in the overnights action report, but in the end, we are the most important, not most important, but the most influential country in the world, and this has been an unprecedented election process. And so what's really at stake here? Why is it important? Well, first of all, not only are you going to have a new president and potentially a new party, but you're also going to have new Congress people and new senators. There are a lot of races right now in the House that are going to be should be watched closely. You should be looking at those very closely, because that's going to give you a longer-term pulse based on the results of this action of the election on what the markets are going to do after the initial jolt, as we discussed this morning. You're going to look at legislative policies then that are going to be impacted. Right now, what are the scenarios, though? What do you want to start thinking about as far as watching the elections tonight and really seeing, okay, is there going to be a bigger impact if more Republicans get in, more Democrats get in, if Clinton wins, if Trump wins? And really what it comes down to this. Currently right now, the Republicans, if you didn't already know, you're going to know now, have the majority in the House and the Senate. The Democrats are going to need to pick up about 30 seats to get the majority in the House. So that's why you're going to have to look at your congressional races very closely. Now, since the vice president is the tiebreaker, if Trump wins, that means that for the Democrats to take the Senate, they would have to win 5 seats. If Clinton wins, they only have to win 4 seats because obviously her running mate, a Democrat, will be the tiebreaker. And so thus, if they pick up 4 senatorial seats with a Clinton victory, they could take over the Senate. So now then they have the Senate, then we'll watch the Congress. Now, if Mr. Trump wins the White House, like I said, his running mate, Pence, is obviously a blue-blooded Republican, and he will be the tiebreaker. Thus, we need 5 Democrats in the Senate. So basically, the outcome of the presidential election is going to be tomorrow's reaction. But what's going to really resonate across the markets, and specifically the capital markets, is going to be the outcome of the congressional and senatorial races as well. There is going to be potential changes if, in fact, you start to see that there's a one-party system. The capital markets could basically say that that's going to influence their direction of what their spending is going to be. It's also going to impact our currency and world currencies, commodities, stocks, and the bonds. They're all going to start to move. So let's take a look at some of the scenarios, right? Yes, we could look at the current polls and say, okay, Clinton's winning. We can lock that one in, but I'm not ready to do that. I think it's worth at least walking through the scenarios. So then you just basically have a very transparent level, clear understanding as you watch all of the pundits talk. First of all, if Mrs. Clinton wins, okay, great. And the GOP still maintains the majority in both the House and the Senate, or at least one House, like or Congress or the Senate. That means that basically we'll still have gridlock. The markets right now want gridlock. That is what ultimately will then keep the markets at least grounded in its current environment. Now, what's going to bring a dynamic of uncertainty is going to be, let's say that Clinton wins and they win the Senate and they win Congress. Then you have a one-party system. That is going to then be somewhat of an outcome where all of a sudden you're going to have maybe some businesses, maybe some different corporations looking at this saying, well, this isn't beneficial for us. Maybe we're more inclusive, maybe whatever the case may be. Right now, that's going to change everyone's game plans that they've had basically for the last, almost 12 years. Now, if Mr. Trump wins the presidency and the GOP continues to hold control of both the Congress and the Senate, well, that's a scenario that I think everyone is looking at saying we're going to have not only a lot of volatility, there is going to be a lot of emotion. There is going to be a lot of fluctuation. One of the things that I want to note is that as we go through this night, if in fact we go late into the night and we get into the holy Chad situation again, like we did in 2000, a contested presidential election is going to be one that's going to be very difficult to trade. That's why I think right now where you saw a lot of institutions and retail investors that are trading actively have really built up a lot of cash. That is one of the biggest fears right now is a contested election or a Trump GOP victory because it just brings a total amount of uncertainty. It breaks the mold, and there have been a lot of people calling for that. It breaks the status quo. The other thing that I think is being under-reported on, discussed, are the referendums as far as on state ballots, as far as implications for local and state taxes, and that potential impact on disposable income and public spending initiatives. I have to tell you, we had some road initiatives, some school initiatives, some property tax initiatives that were on our ballots here in Illinois, and it is going to impact people's spending habits. It's going to impact where people are going to continue to live. And so we need to keep an eye on those as well. Those are some of the things that if we start to see this sway either to the left or to the right, you could see some major impacts on the consumer, which is going to ultimately going to impact the markets. So basically what's in play? Well, everything, all right? The bottom line is that we have a lot of scenarios that we lined up here. The strategy right now is to conserve your capital, keep your powder dry, trim up as much of the risk that you have right now, stick with your core portfolio. Hopefully you took advantage of the high implied volatility the 2 previous days beforehand or the week previous so that you maybe wrote some premium against some holdings. Right now, you could look at maybe a little insurance policies, but again, I would be very careful. I would just look at your risk, look at what your downside swag is on the worst case scenario, and understand that clearly. If you don't, or if you don't have the ability, try to get a hold of your advisor, see what they've been recommending and suggesting. But the bottom line is that there are going to be winners and losers in this. But as I had mentioned this morning, there are going to be some immediate beneficiaries to the immediate election of either Trump or Clinton. And I'll just roll those down real quick so that you could think about strategies that you might want to implement post whatever happens with this election. Now, I drilled it down in much more detail this morning in what's hot on the open. But basically, if Clinton wins, some potential immediate beneficiaries would be alternative energy companies, managed care and hospital facilities and companies, defense stocks, infrastructure companies, export-orientated companies, consumer staples, Mexican peso, as well as other Mexican initiatives, and major stock indices. As I said, I discussed this morning in What's Hot Now about some of the not only specific sector ETFs, but we also broke down some general stocks that make up those sector ETFs. Some potential immediate beneficiaries if Trump is elected is going to be biotech stocks. Been very volatile all over the map, but biotech stocks, major pharma companies, traditional oil companies, defense stocks, infrastructure companies, banks, the Japanese yen, gold, and technology companies with large cash holdings overseas. There are going to be immediate influences or beneficiaries to those areas and sectors. So you want to start drilling down and taking a look at the general sector ETFs, and then break down the top holdings in there to see if there's either holdings you already have, or there are holdings that might look interesting to you based on what you're seeing as a potential outcome on the general election, which is the presidential election. And then you're going to start to drill it down and see what the impact are of your local elections. In other words, the congressional and senatorial elections, as well as some of the referendums that are on your ballots. Now, you got some homework to do. You got to get out and vote before the polls close. But I think that we have enough here so that you can clearly see that there are opportunities out there. You're just going to have to set them up right now. Not to say that it's right time to pull the trigger, but just having that plan, having that setup, having those watch lists literally ready, and you're watching those, is going to have you on the road to being prepared for the outcome of this binary event. Okay, folks, we're going to be talking at Tech Talk at 3:30 Eastern Time. We're going to break down some of these minutia from a technical perspective, both using charts and options, just to break it down so you get a little bit more transparency in the potential opportunities that are out there in the market. Till then, have a great rest of the trading day. Get out there and vote. This is your right. Take advantage of it, and keep an eye on MarketStream.live. We'll talk to you this afternoon, Tech Talk, and then the closing bell. Take care.